As someone who is insanely interested in forensic psychology, I find it both fun and interesting to profile different fictional serial killers and criminals. And it kind of helps me put into practice some of the more modern theories of psychology. Now, growing up, I was completely addicted to horror movies, and just like most kids, there was one in my generation that stood out the most, especially in my nightmares. And that would be none other than Freddy Krueger.
Wake up. Wake up, wake up, wake up.
You really shouldn't fall asleep in class.
Now, I actually had nightmares often as a child. I don't really know why. Maybe it was all the horror movies. But after seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street, I would try to stay up at night. I would be literally afraid to fall asleep. I was always scared that I was going to see his like half melted face when I closed my eyes. So eventually, of course, I got over the fear and like this weird fascination took its place, which I guess is a good thing. Now, just like on my Hannibal Lecter video, I have found some very interesting and sometimes even humorous psychoanalyses of Freddy Krueger online. And if you've ever heard of the Myers-Briggs personality test, he actually has a score on that personality test. Now, for all my study of psychology and things like that, I actually don't remember much about the Myers-Briggs personality test. I know, I'm a failure. I apologize. But apparently, Freddy Krueger rates an ESTP. I don't even know what that is, but okay, we're gonna go over some of the qualities that he has. So Freddy Krueger exhibits an affinity for attention, like most killers. But of course, like Freddy has a super like out there flair. He goes very overdramatic sometimes. He seems to be very popular, at least with his victims. He's definitely a problem solver when it comes to killing. And one of the funnier comments that I saw on his personality test was the fact that he was a pragmatic killer. He seemed to be very logical in the way that he killed people. I don't really understand how logic and killing people goes hand in hand, but I guess with Freddy Krueger it does. He does seem to be able to predict his victims' every move. But of course, there's a very strong supernatural element with him as a killer. It's not just that he's a human anymore. He's some kind of monster, right? He obviously has a strong eye for people's weaknesses. He preys on their fears and the things that they're most afraid of. He tends to be a seasonal killer, which is evidenced by the fact that like each sequel, it's as if Freddy Krueger has been laying dormant, and then all of a sudden something happens and it sparks up the killings again, and yay, slaughter. To start back at the very beginning of the fictional Freddy Krueger, he was definitely someone who lived on the margins of society. He appeared to have been rejected by society completely. Not many people knew him besides children, obviously. And I feel like he was one of those people that was probably rejected within his own family as a child. And it's very rare, I believe, but sometimes child molesters or child killers were actually abused as children themselves. So it could be possible that Freddy Krueger was molested, sexually assaulted, or abused physically as a child, to the point where he, of course, felt unworthy and rejected, and, of course, extremely angry with everyone around him. Now, as a side note, one of the famous psychologists, I forget his name, if I remember it, I'll post it up here, or I'll post his article down below. He mentioned that the movies themselves being called A Nightmare on Elm Street is kind of ironic, because in the movies they depict what is an actual disorder called nightmare disorder. And that is a disorder that's basically defined through repeated awakenings throughout the night with recollected terrifying dreams that usually involve some kind of threat to your survival. Now, many people that have trauma experience this disorder, and it could possibly be linked to PTSD as well. I mean, think about it. If you survived something super traumatic, you're probably going to have nightmares about it for a little bit. Now, there were a few articles that were interviewing Wes Craven specifically on how he managed to create the character Freddy Krueger, and he seems to kind of have built the character off of an actual real-life bully who used to pick on Craven, who had the last name Krueger, I believe. Now, the character Freddy Krueger himself also represented these huge concepts like genocide. There was one instance where I believe Wes Craven mentioned that Krueger sounded like a Nazi name. So there could be some subtle hints at, Nazism, if that's a word. Now, while Wes Craven didn't specifically mention the fact that there was a real-life Frederick Krueger that this character could have been based on, it would later be discovered that there really was a Freddy Krueger. And he was eerily similar to the character. Frederick Krueger lived between 1838 and 1910 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Krueger was said to have lived either in or near an abandoned factory, which just so happened to be within a 3-mile radius of several body dump sites where local police had found the bodies of almost 20 children. Now, all these children were brutally murdered, but there was no mention of sexual assault, so I'm not sure if that happened, or if this was just a person who preyed on children because they were weak, and that was a time where children were not always watched as much as they are now. Now, this is just hearsay. This is just a story that I read, an article that I read, so I have no idea if there is factual evidence to back up this story. But according to the rumors, Frederick Krueger had actually set up a fully functioning torture chamber inside of the abandoned factory. The police would later apprehend him. He would go on trial and be found criminally insane. And we're going to talk about why I disagree with that in just a second. But according to the story, Frederick Krueger, spent the rest of his life in Kings Park Psychiatric Hospital, where he died, ironically, in his sleep at the ripe old age of 72 years old. Now, there are some rumors that that psychiatric hospital does still stand to this day and that it is haunted. So, if you live in the Ohio area, go check it out. Okay, I have an issue with the criminally insane part, just for the simple fact that this man spent time, money, and effort setting up a fully functioning torture room to kill these children. There is pre-planning here, way in advance. There is premeditation of his murders. There's a fantasy element. But at the same time, there's logical thinking behind that. Like, why do people set up torture chambers in hidden, remote areas? Because they're planning on killing and trying to get away with it. This, to me, screams logic, psychopath, sociopath. He's able to lure these children in somehow. I don't feel like this person is criminally insane. I don't feel like he's suffering from some kind of delusion where he can't help himself. That's just me. But at the same time, this was back in the day, and during that time it was very hard to look at the actions that this man did and think that this man could possibly be sane. But anyway, back to the fictional character of Freddy Krueger. He is definitely a psychopath, right? Even in some of the scenes that they showed of him as a human with the townsfolk about to burn him up alive, he doesn't, in my opinion, exhibit any remorse, shame, or guilt for his actions. In those scenes before his actual death, you see that he's super emotional, he's crying, but I feel like that's more of fear and stress due to the fact that he was found out and he was caught and his life was on the line. More so than actually feeling guilty for what he did. But of course, after the townsfolk kill him and he turns into this supernatural, freakish nightmare killer, there's no remorse, there's no guilt, and in my opinion, all emotion is effectively wiped out, but he becomes a sexual sadist.
Hi, Chris.
Who are you?
You look just as beautiful as ever.
Look at the innuendos, the sexual lingo, the hints of just nastiness, just nastiness. So there are some quite explicit scenes and innuendos throughout the movies that do indicate that Freddy Krueger gets off on the murders and killing his victims. Now, if he was still a human killer, if this wasn't a whole supernatural fairy tale kind of thing, it wouldn't make sense for a child molester to suddenly switch over to killing young adults and adolescents and teens. Usually child molesters and child killers have a preference and they stick to that preference. But with the supernatural element coming into play, it becomes mainly about revenge. It seems like the character Freddy Krueger only exists because of his unfinished business, because of his not having finished off his victims before death. He comes back to get revenge for the townsfolk killing him. So that's pretty much it. What do you guys think? I know it's sometimes completely insane to try and classify something that is obviously supernatural in real life terms, but one of the creepiest things in the world is the fact that some serial killers will mention horror movie characters as inspiration, or as, you know, early life influences. And I feel like that's really disturbing, of course, but I don't know, it's just kind of fun practice for me to think about how these killers think. I mean, if you can profile a fictional character, then you should be able to profile a human, right? Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I hope you guys are enjoying this awesome journey we're on with the 31 days of Halloween. What are you guys doing to amp up for Halloween? Have you visited your local spirit store? Have you gone Halloween decoration shopping? Is your Halloween tree up? I don't get to have one this year, so I'm really bummed about that. Let me know what y'all are doing to prepare for Halloween in the comments down below, and I will see you guys tomorrow.